Hello, welcome back to Teen Story Share. This week we're continuing The Glittering Court by Rochelle Mead, and this week we'll be reading two chapters 2 and 3, due to Teen Story Share being canceled last week. And if you did miss week 1, that will be linked down below. Chapter 2. I realized then that I was taking the first approach to this bad thing with Lionel. I was letting it crush me. And so I decided then and there that I would choose the nobler, unflinching approach. I would endure the pain. In the following weeks, I smiled and made my quips and acted as though our household wasn't being torn apart. While the servants worked and worried about their futures, I calmly went about the tasks that were appropriate to young noblewomen, painting pictures and planning my wedding attire. When callers came to wish us well, I sat with them and feigned excitement. More than once, I heard the arrangement referred to as a smart match. It reminded me of when I was 6, when my mother and I had watched Princess Margarita's wedding procession go by. The princess had sat in a carriage, waving and stiffly smiling as she held hands with a Laurendian duke she'd only met the week before. "She looks a little green," I'd said. "Nonsense, and if you're lucky," my mother had told me, "you'll make a smart match like that." Would my mother have allowed this if she were still alive? Would this have turned out differently? Probably. A lot of things would have turned out differently if my parents were still alive. "My lady!" I looked up from the canvas I'd been painting, a field of purple and pink poppies copied from one of the great masters in the National Gallery. A page stood in front of me. From the tone of his voice, I could tell this wasn't the first time he'd spoken to me. "Yes?" I asked. The word came out a bit more harshly than I'd intended. I'd had an argument with Grandmama this morning about the dismissal of my favorite cook, and it still bothered me. He bowed, relieved at finally being acknowledged. "There's a gentleman caller here. He's, making Ada cry." I blinked, wondering if I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" Taya and Vanessa sat beside me, busy with sewing. They looked up from their work, equally perplexed. The page shifted uncomfortably. "I don't really understand it myself, my lady. It's some sort of meeting arranged by Lady Branson. I think she was supposed to be here to supervise, but was delayed by business. I settled them into the west drawing room, and when I returned to check on them, Ada was quite hysterical. I thought you would want to know." "Yes, certainly." And here I'd thought this would be a boring day. The other ladies started to rise when I did, but I urged them to sit down. As I followed the page back into the house, I asked, "Do you have any idea what this so-called gentleman is here for?" "Another position, I believe." I felt a small pang of guilt. Staff cuts had begun, and Ada was one of the ladies being dismissed from my entourage. I'd been able to keep only one. Lady Dorothy had assured me the replacements who'd been selected under her close supervision were exemplary, but I was pretty sure their chief function would be to spy on me. As I made my way to the drawing room, I pondered what could have caused this unexpected morning drama. Lady Branson was my grandmother's chief lady. If she'd arranged a position for Ada, I had to imagine it would be something respectable, and not worthy of a breakdown. "These weren't tears of joy?" I asked the page, just to clarify. "No, my lady." We entered the room, and sure enough, there was poor Ada sitting on a sofa and sobbing into her hands. A man, his back to me, was bent over, trying awkwardly to comfort her by patting her shoulder. Immediately, my heart hardened as I wondered what kind of monster had brought this about. "Lady Whitmore, Countess of Rothford," announced the page. That startled both Ada and her guest. She lifted her face from her hands, still sniffling, and managed to rise for a small curtsy. The man also straightened, turning to look at me. As he did, the images I'd been building of some old, twisted scoundrel vanished. Well, maybe he was a scoundrel, but who was I to say? And the rest of him? My eyes burned at the sight of him. Deep auburn hair swept back in a short, fashionable tail, revealed a face with clean lines and high cheekbones. His eyes were an intense blue-gray, contrasting with skin tanned from being outdoors. That wasn't fashionable among nobles, but I could have deduced he wasn't one of us from a mile away. "Your ladyship," he said, giving a proper bow, "it is a pleasure to meet you." I gestured the page away and sat down, a signal for the other two as well. "I'm not sure I can say the same, seeing as you've sent my lady-in-waiting into hysterics." A chagrined expression crossed that handsome face. That wasn't my intent. I'm just as surprised as you. I'd been under the impression that Lady Branson had settled things with her." "She did," exclaimed Ada. I could see new sobs bubbling up within her. "But now that it's here, I just don't know if I want to go." He turned on a smile for her, one so confident and so practiced that I was certain he must use it regularly to get his way. "Well, a few nerves are understandable, but once you've seen how the other girls live at the glittering court—" "Hold on," I interrupted. "What is the glittering court?" It sounded vaguely brothelish, but that seemed unlikely if Lady Branson had arranged it. "I'd be happy to explain it, my lady, assuming you don't find the logistics boring." I looked him over. "Believe me, there's absolutely nothing about this situation I find boring." He turned that gallant smile on me, no doubt hoping it would win me over, as it did others. It kind of did. "The glittering court is an exciting opportunity for young women like Ada, an opportunity that will transform their lives and—" "Hold on one more time," I said. "What's your name?" He stood and bowed again. "Cedric Thorn, at your service." No title, but again that didn't surprise me. The more I studied him, the more intrigued I was. He wore a brown coat of light wool that flared slightly at the knee, longer than current trends. A brown brocade vest under the coat caught the light. It was a respectable, subdued outfit, one a prosperous merchant might wear, but a bright amber pin in the hat he held told me he wasn't entirely without flair. "My lady?" he asked. I realized I'd been staring and offered a grand wave of my hand. "Please, continue explaining this gleaming court of yours." "Glittering, my lady. And as I was saying, it's an exciting opportunity for young women to move up in the world. Ada here is exactly the type of bright and promising girl we're looking for." I raised an eyebrow at that. Ada was by far my most uninteresting maidservant. She was pretty, which, I'd learned, tended to be synonymous with bright and promising for most men. He launched into what had to be a well-rehearsed speech. "The glittering court is a highly respected enterprise on both sides of the ocean. My father and my uncle founded it 10 years ago, after learning just how few women there are in Adoria." Adoria? That's what this was about? I nearly leaned forward and then remembered myself. Still, it was hard not to be taken in. Adoria. The country discovered across the sunset sea. Adoria. The very sound of it inspired adventure and excitement. It was a new world, a world far removed from the one in which I was required to marry my itching cousin, but also a world without galleries and theaters and luxuriously dressed nobility. "There are plenty of Ikori women there," I remarked, feeling the need to say something. Cedric's smile broadened, warming his features. Were his eyelashes longer than mine? That certainly seemed unfair. "Yes, but our colonists aren't looking for savage Ikori wives in kilts and tartans. Well," he added, "most of our colonists aren't looking for savage wives. I suppose there's always someone who finds that appealing." I nearly asked what he found appealing, and then again reminded myself I was a lady of exalted rank. "Most of our settlers are looking for gentle, cultured, Osphridian wives, especially those men who've made their fortunes there. Plenty set sail for Adoria with nothing more than the clothes on their backs, and have now found success as businessmen and plantation owners. They've become pillars in their communities, men of prestige." Cedric held up his hands grandly, a performer on his stage. "They want suitable wives to start families with. His Majesty wants it too. He's ordered the founding of several other colonies and the expansion of current ones, but it's very difficult when Osphridian men outnumber women 3-1. When women do go, they're usually ordinary working-class girls who are already married. That's not what the new nobility is looking for." "New nobility?" I asked. I was getting sucked into his pitch. It was a new experience, having someone else turn the powers of persuasion on me. "The new nobility. That's what we call them. These ordinary men who found extraordinary greatness in the new world." "It's very catchy. Did you come up with it?" He looked surprised by the question. "No, my lady, my father did. He's a master of publicity and persuasion, far more so than me." I find that incredible. Please continue with your new nobility. Cedric studied me for a beat, and there was something in his eyes, a calculation or maybe a reassessment. The new nobility. They don't need a title or right of birth to claim power and prestige. They've earned it through hard work and have become a nobility, of sorts, and now need suitably noble wives. But since women of your rank aren't exactly lining up to sail over, the glittering court has taken it upon itself to create a cohort of young women willing to transform. We take lovely girls like Ada here, girls of common birth, girls with no family, or maybe too much family, and we train them up to greatness. He smiled briefly when he made his comment about noble women lining up, like it was a joke between us. I felt a pang in my heart. Little did he know that just then, faced with a lifetime shackled to a sullen cousin and an overbearing grandmother-in-law, I would have given up my regal world and sailed to the colonies in an instant, savage conditions or no. Not that I could ever have made it to the docks without dozens of people trying to usher me back to my proper sphere of society. Ada sniffled, reminding me she was still here. I'd known her for years, barely giving her a second thought. Now, for the first time ever, I felt jealous of her. She had a new world of potential and adventure opening up right before her. So, you're going to take Ada to Adoria, I said. It was difficult keeping my tone light, lest my envy show. Not right away, said Cedric. First, we have to make sure she's trained up to glittering court standards. I'm sure she's received some education in your service, but nothing to match your own. She'll spend a year in one of my uncle's manor houses with other girls her age, learning all sorts of things that make up for that. Wait, I interrupted. My grandmother would have been appalled at the completely haphazard way I was managing this conversation, but this whole situation was too strange for me to get caught up in formalities. You're saying she'll have an education that'll match mine in a year? Not an exact match, no, but she'll be able to pass herself off among upper classes, maybe even the nobility, after that time. Knowing Ada as I did, I was again skeptical, but urged him on. Continue. We'll start by polishing up her basic education in reading and accounting, and then expand into other more genteel areas. How to run a household and manage servants, music lessons, how to throw social engagements, what to talk about at social engagements, art, history, philosophy, foreign language if there's time. That's very extensive, I said, casting a curious glance at Ada. That's why it takes a year, Cedric explained. She'll live in one of my uncle's manors, learning all these things, and then sail over to Adoria with all the girls from the other manors, if she chooses to go. At this, Ada finally came to life. Her head jerked up. I don't have to go? Well, no, said Cedric, a little surprised at the question. He produced a roll of paper from his coat, with a bit of a flourish if I wasn't mistaken. At the end of your year, your contract states you can either choose to go to Adoria to have a marriage made for you, or you can leave the glittering court, at which point we'll find a suitable work arrangement to reimburse us for your education. Ada looked immensely more cheerful, and I realized she probably thought said arrangement would involve a job similar to what she had now. I'm guessing he means a workhouse or a factory, I said. Her face fell. Oh, but it'd still be here, in Osford. Yes, said Cedric, if you want to stay. But honestly, who'd pick those kinds of long work hours over a chance to be on the arm of a wealthy, doting husband who will drape you in silks and jewels? I don't get to choose him, she argued. That's not entirely true. When you arrive in Adoria, you and the other girls will have a 3-month period in which you'll be presented to those eligible men who've shown interest in our jewels. That's what my uncle calls the glittering court girls. He turned his smile to its most dazzling, trying to reassure her. You'll love it there. The colonial men go crazy when we bring new girls. It's a season of parties and other social engagements, and you'll get a whole new wardrobe for it all. Adorian fashions are somewhat different from ours. If more than one man makes an offer for you, then you can choose the one you want. Once again, I found myself brimming with jealousy, but Ada still looked uncertain. No doubt she'd heard tales of danger and savagery about Adoria, and in fairness, some weren't unfounded. When settlers from Osfrid and other countries had landed in Adoria, there had been terrible bloodshed between them and the Akori clans living there. Many of the Akori had been driven away, but we still heard stories of other tragedies, diseases, storms, and wild animals, to name a few. But what were those things compared to the riches and greatness that Adoria offered? And wasn't there danger everywhere? I wanted to shake some sense into her, to tell her she should take this opportunity and never look back. Surely there could be no greater adventure than this. But she'd never had a sense of adventure, never seen the promise of taking a chance on something she didn't know. That was part of the reason I hadn't picked her to come with me to Lionel's household. After much deliberation, she turned to me. "What do you think I should do, my lady?" The question caught me unprepared, and suddenly, all I could think of was my grandmother's words. "You'll have people making choices for you your entire life. Get used to it." I felt myself softening. "You have to make your own choices, especially since you'll be on your own once you leave my service." I looked over at Cedric, and for the first time I saw uneasiness on those striking features. He was afraid Ada was going to opt out. Did the glittering court have quotas to meet? Was he on the hook to come back with someone? "Mr. Thorn has made it all sound very lovely," she replied. "But I kind of feel like some trinket being bought and sold." "Women always feel that way," I said. But in the end, Ada accepted Cedric's offer anyway because, as she saw it, she had nowhere else to go. Over her shoulder, I scanned the contract, which was mostly a more formal explanation of what Cedric had told us. When she signed, I did a double take. "That's your full name?" I asked. "Adelaide? Why don't you go by that?" She shrugged. "Too many letters. It took me years to learn to spell it." Cedric seemed to struggle to keep a straight face. I wondered if he was starting to question this choice and if Ada could really be made into part of his new nobility. Contract in hand, he stood up and bowed to me. To her, he said, "I have other contracts to deliver this afternoon and some errands to run at the university. You can take the day to pack your things, and our carriage will come to retrieve you this evening and take you to your manor. My father and I will join you along the way." "Where is this manor?" I asked. "I'm not sure which one she'll be assigned to," he admitted. "I'll know by tonight. My uncle maintains 4 for the Glittering Court, with 10 girls each. One is in Bedfordshire, 2 are in Donley, another in Fairhope." They were true country houses then, I noted, placing each location on a mental map. They were each at least half a day from where we were in Osfro. He delivered a few more last-minute instructions before making motions to leave. I offered to walk him out, which was a bit unorthodox, and took him back toward the garden I'd been in earlier. "University? So you're a student then, Mr. Thorn?" "Yes, you don't sound surprised by that." "It's in your manner, and your coat. Only a student would set his own fashion standards." He laughed. "I didn't. It's actually an Adorian fashion. I've got to look the part when I go with the girls." "You get to go too?" Somehow, that made this entire thing even more agonizing. "You've been there before?" "Not in years, but—" He drew up short as we rounded a corner and heard more sniffling. Old Doris, the cook, was trudging toward the kitchen, trying not to cry as she walked. "Don't take this the wrong way," Cedric began, "but there are a lot of tears in your household." I shot him a wry look. "Much is changing. Doris won't be going with us either. She's blind in one eye and my cousin doesn't want her." He turned to study me, and I averted my gaze, not wanting him to see how much this decision pained me. In her condition, Doris wasn't going to have an easy time finding work. It was another argument Grandmama had won. I was losing my edge. "Is she good?" Cedric asked. "Very." "Excuse me," he called out to her. Doris turned in surprise. "My lord?" Neither of us bothered to correct her error. "Is it true that your services are for hire? I can understand if someone else has already hired you on." She blinked, her one good eye focusing on him. "No, my lord." There's an opening over in one of the university's kitchens. 4 silvers a month and room and board. If you're interested, it's yours. Although the thought of cooking for so many is daunting." "Milord," she interrupted, pulling herself up to her full but short height, "I have overseen 7-course dinners, hosting 100 nobles. I can handle swaggering boys." Cedric's expression remained dignified. "Glad to hear it. Go to the university's north office tomorrow and tell them your name. They'll give you more information." Old Doris's mouth dropped, and she looked to me for confirmation. I nodded encouragingly. Yes, my lord. I'll go right after breakfast's served. Thank you so much." "Well, that's lucky," I told him, once we were alone again. I certainly wouldn't say so, but I thought it was incredibly kind of him to offer such a thing, let alone notice her. Most didn't. Lucky that there was an open position. "There isn't, actually," he said, "but I'll stop by and talk to the office today. By the time I'm done, they'll have an opening." "Mr. Thorn, something tells me you could sell salvation to a priest." He smiled at the old adage. "What makes you think I haven't?" We reached the garden and were nearing the exit when he halted again. An expression of disbelief crossed his face, and I turned toward what had caught his eye. My poppies painting. "That's Peter Cosingford's Poppies. I saw it in the National Gallery. Except—" He trailed off, face full of confusion as he took in the canvas and the pigments beside it. "It's a copy. My attempt at a copy. I have others. It's just something I do for fun." "You make copies of great works for fun?" Belatedly, he added, "My lady." "No, Mr. Thorn, that's what you do." The smile on his face was genuine, and I found I liked it better than the show ones. "Well, I'm pretty sure I could never copy you." We'd reached the front gate, and his words made me come to a halt. It was less about their meaning than the way he'd said them, the tone, the warmth. I tried to think of a witty retort, but my normally quick mind had frozen up. "And if you won't take offense at me speaking openly," he added quickly, "I'd be disappointed if you didn't. It's just, well, I'm a little disappointed I probably won't ever get a chance to see you again." Perhaps realizing that was too open, he gave a hasty bow. "Farewell, and best of luck to you, my lady." One of the guards outside the gate unlocked it for him, and I watched him walk out the gate, admiring the way the velvet coat hugged his body. "But you will be seeing me again," I murmured. "Just wait." Chapter 3. The plan had been forming in the back of my mind ever since Ada had tearfully signed her contract. I had a chance to outsmart the bad things looming over me, and as my father had advised, I needed to act quickly. As more and more details became clearer, my excitement grew, and it was all I could do not to shout it to the heavens. Mastering myself, I walked quickly, but sedately, out of the garden back to the drawing room where Ada sat morosely. I dodged 2 servants lugging my grandmother's chaise longue, and was glad Cedric hadn't seen that. It looked like we were being looted. "Well, you must be excited," I said cheerfully to Ada. "Such an exciting opportunity ahead of you." She rested her chin in her hands. "As you say, my lady." I sat down beside her, feigning astonishment. "It's a great thing for you." I know, she sighed. It's just... Her attempts at self-control failed utterly, and tears ran down her cheeks. I offered her a silk handkerchief. "I don't want to go to a strange land. I don't want to sail across the sunset sea. I don't want to get married." "Then don't go," I said. "Do something else when Grandmama and I leave. Get another job." She shook her head. "I signed the contract, and what can I do? I'm not like you, my lady. I can't just walk away. I don't have the means, and no other noble families are hiring. At least not at this level. I've looked." Walk away? Did she really think I could? Ada looked at my ancestry and wealth as if that was power, but really a commoner had more freedom than me, which was why, perhaps, I needed to become one. "You're the Countess of Rothford. Someone with a name like that can't move among the nameless." "What would you do then, if you had the means?" If I wasn't working here, she paused to wipe her nose, I'd go to my family in Hoddleworth. I have cousins there. They have a nice dairy farm. Hoddleworth's as far north as you can get, I reminded her. That's not an easy journey either. There's no ocean, she exclaimed. It's still in Osfrid, and there are no savages there. You'd rather work on a dairy farm than marry an Adorian adventurer? Admittedly, this played into my plans better than I'd expected, but it sounded so comical I couldn't help but ask, how did you even end up being referred to this glittering court? Lady Branson's son John attends the university with him, Master Cedric. Lord John heard him talking about how he needed pretty girls for some task his father had set him. Lord John knew you were disbanding the household and asked his mother if there were any girls who needed a place to go. When she approached me, well, what could I do? I took her hand in an unusual show of informality between us. You'll go to Hoddleworth. That's what you'll do. Ada gaped, and I led her up to my bedroom where other maids were sorting clothes. I sent them off to new tasks and then produced some topaz earrings from my jewelry box. Here, I said, handing them over to Ada. Sell them. More than enough to buy passage with a reputable group traveling to Hoddleworth. I'd expected her to have some greater lifelong dream, one I might not be able to afford. This was a bargain. Her eyes widened. My lady, I can't take these. You can, I insisted, my own heart racing. I can't bear the thought of you being miserable. I want you to be with your family and find happiness. You deserve it. That wasn't entirely a lie, but my true motivations were hardly so altruistic. She clutched the earrings in her hands and hope started to bloom on her face. No, I can't. That contract, that's binding. They'll find me and I'll take care of it. No need to worry. I'll get you out of it. I can do those kinds of things, you know. But to make sure it will all, work out, you need to leave now, right away. It's just after midday. Most of the traveling merchants will be finishing business and heading north soon. And then you need to disavow all knowledge of the glittering court. Never, ever tell anyone they approached you. Her eyes were huge. I won't, my lady. Never a word. And I'll go now, as soon as I pack. No, don't. Don't take too much. Pack lightly. You can't look like you're leaving for good. Act like you're just going off on an errand. I didn't want anyone noticing her departure, possibly stopping her and asking her questions. She nodded at the wisdom of my words. You're right, my lady. Of course you are. Besides, with these, I can buy new clothes when I reach Hoddleworth. Upon my advice, she gathered only a few small things, a change of clothes, a family locket, and a pack of Tamsin cards. She flushed, seeing my raised eyebrow at that last one. It's just a lark, my lady. We read the cards for fun. People always have. Until the Alanzans made them a key part of their religion, I said. The priests are burning them these days. Don't get yourself arrested as a heretic. Her eyes widened. I don't worship demons or trees. Everything else she left behind. The household was so busy getting ready for the move that no one paid us a second glance as we sneaked around about our tasks. I took her remaining possessions, which weren't much, only a few items of clothing, back to my room and hid them while I covertly saw her off. She startled me with a quick, highly inappropriate hug, tears shining in her eyes. Thank you, my lady, thank you. You've saved me from a terrible fate. And you may have done the same for me, I thought. Upon my instructions, she walked casually out the front gate as though she were just going on a market errand. I don't think the sentry on duty even noticed her leaving. She was invisible, something I couldn't even comprehend, yet. As soon as she was gone, I returned to my painting in the garden, trying for all the world to look as though I were going about my usual attempts to pass the time, while the rest of the household labored. Whenever I could work it into our conversation with other servants, I mentioned casually that Ada had left for a new position, and how wonderful it was that it had been arranged for her. Everyone knew someone had come asking about her before, but no one knew the details of that conversation. Many other servants had moved on already, so her departure was nothing new. As the evening wore on, word came that my grandmother and Lady Branson had been detained for dinner while out visiting a friend. That development couldn't have suited me better, though I did have a moment of pause when I realized I might never see Grandmama again. We'd exchanged harsh words that morning, but that didn't diminish my love for her, or hers for me. Everything she'd done in this mess with Lionel had been to benefit me, and there would be a huge fallout when it disintegrated. Don't falter now, I told myself. I took deep breaths, forcing calm. Grandmama can deal with whatever happens. And when the scandal dies down, she'll live with Lady Branson and her daughter. She'll be much happier there than under Lady Dorothy's close supervision. Even if we were apart, there was still the chance Grandmama might very well walk through my door some far-off day. But oh, how she'd worry about me. I hoped that when we met again, she'd understand why I'd had to do this. I couldn't marry into a life of luxury if it meant leaving my soul at the door. After dinner, I complained of a headache and retired to my room. It was about the only reason I could have to be alone, and even that wasn't easy. As soon as I'd shooed my doting maids away, I changed out of the fine silk dress I'd worn for dinner and put on Ada's simpler linen one, which gave me some difficulty. I usually had maids helping me in and out of my clothes and wasn't accustomed to managing buttons without extra hands. Ada's dress was dark blue in color, with no ornamentation. The white chemise I put on under it was equally plain. I'd never truly noted until then how drab my lady's clothing really was. Still, it would help conceal me, as did the gray hooded cloak I wore over it. I packed the rest of her clothing into a small satchel, and then hurried down a narrow servant's staircase little used at this time of night. After ascertaining no one was around, I slipped out a back door. That put me in the courtyard by our stables, which were now darkened with twilight's shadows. Servants bustled about here, winding things down for the night, and no one noticed me as I huddled in the darkness. This was the most dangerous part of this endeavor, the part where it could all fall apart if anyone got a good look at me. I had to walk across the courtyard toward the stable's back gates. The spring weather had cooled considerably, and I wasn't the only one with a hood. I just prayed no one would take a look at my face as I walked. The stable boy guarding the back gate was busy whittling, his attention turned to anyone trying to get in, not out. If he noticed me, he saw only the back of one of the servant girls who came and went about the household's tasks. Once I was out of the enclosure, I hurried around the corner of our home, out toward the busy thoroughfare of our front street. Traffic on it had slowed since earlier in the day, but there were still horses and pedestrians out for the evening, their steps clattering on the cobblestone street. Most didn't give me a second glance. I was a lady's maid, not a lady. An errant priest of Euros stood on a corner, preaching against the Alanzan heretics. He pointed accusingly at me, his finger right up in my face. "You wouldn't worship the sun and moon, would you, girl?" There was a fanatic, feverish gleam in his eyes, and I was so astonished that I froze before him. "You, stay right there!" I gasped as 2 city sentries came running toward me. I was barely across the street from my own home. How had they known to come for me already? But it wasn't me they were after. They seized the priest, one holding the thrashing man while the other bound his wrists. "How dare you lay hands on one of Euros's chosen?" bellowed the priest. One of the sentries snorted. "You're no true follower of Euros. See how strong your faith is after a few nights in prison." He dragged the shrieking priest away while the other sentry turned to me. I quickly looked down, feigning shyness so he wouldn't see my face. "You all right, miss? Did he hurt you?" "I'm fine, thank you, sir." He shook his head in disgust. "I don't know what the world's coming to when heretics walk the street. You'd best get back to your master's house before it gets darker." I bobbed my head and quickly walked away. The religious atmosphere was dangerous in Osford these days. These radical wandering priests might claim to worship the one god Euros, but their practices challenged the established church almost as much as the Alanzans and their fallen angels. The Orthodox priests and officials were no longer as tolerant as they'd once been, and it took very little to make you suspect. It was a relief when I reached the glittering court's carriage. It was 2 blocks away in the opposite direction, exactly as Cedric had told Ada it would be. It was all black, sleek, and shiny, with the glittering quartz seal on the outside, a circle of golden chain with little jewels interspersed between the links. The carriage was of modest size, not nearly as grand as the one my grandmother or I rode in, but I supposed it would be extraordinary to a girl who knew no different. I walked around to the front where a driver sat waiting over 4 white horses. I called a greeting to him, loud enough to make my voice heard over the noise from the street, but hopefully not enough to attract the attention of the great house on the other side of it. "Hey," I called, "you're here to pick me up. My name is Adelaide." I'd decided on that when I concocted this plan. I'd made Ada disappear and received her promise that she wouldn't mention any of this. But as far as the glittering court officials knew, they had the right girl. Calling myself Ada didn't seem right. What I was doing already felt like theft, but I certainly couldn't go by my own name anymore. So I'd used the beautiful name Ada had been given at birth, the one she had trouble spelling. I felt like I deserved it, just as I deserved this opportunity that terrified her. The driver gave a curt nod. "Yeah, we'll hop in. We're meeting Master Jasper and Master Cedric along the way." Master Cedric. As much as I'd enjoyed looking at him, seeing him now could most certainly create a problem in this brilliant plan I'd created. But I'd have to deal with that later. For now, I had other issues. "Hop in?" I asked, putting my hands on my hips. "Aren't you going to come down and open the door for me?" The man gave an amused snort. "Listen to you, acting like a lady already. You aren't a jewel yet, missy. Now get in. We've got 2 more stops to make, and one's by the Serminican district. I don't want to be out there any longer than I have to. Those Serminicans will rob you blind if you're not watching them." I fumbled with the coach's handle and finally figured out how to open it. Ungracefully, I half-stepped, half-tumbled into the carriage's interior, without the benefit of a stool or pillow offered by a servant. Inside, the carriage was dim, lit only by what light made its way in through the smoky windows. As my eyes adjusted, I could see that the cushioned seat I was on was made of a burgundy velvet of middling quality. Without bothering to make sure I was comfortable, the driver set the horses on their way, causing me to jerk forward. I gripped the walls for support, staring out the darkened glass as the lights of my family's home moved farther and farther away. I held my breath as I watched the retreating house, expecting a group of servants to come tearing out at any moment, swarming the carriage, until it stopped and released me. No one came, though. The house went about its nighttime duties, soon vanishing into the night. Or maybe I was the one vanishing. Maybe I would be forgotten quickly, my face and voice gone from the minds of those I'd once known. The notion made me sadder than I'd expected, and I had to shift my focus back to the plan. Presuming no one thought to check on my headache tonight, I'd have until morning before my absence was discovered, at which point I'd hopefully be long gone into the country. And that was assuming, of course, that Ada didn't get cold feet and come back, if she'd even left the city. If things were on track, she'd have already bought passage with some group of travelers heading north. There were a lot of ifs in this plan, and a lot of things that could go wrong. The rocking carriage made its way through the city and to parts I'd never seen before. I was terribly curious about it all, but as the evening deepened, I could see less and less by the glow of the gas lamps used to illuminate the streets. The carriage finally came to a halt, and I heard a muffled conversation. Moments later, the door opened, and a girl my age stood framed in the doorway, her fiery red hair shining even in the twilight. She shot me a calculating look and then, like me, climbed in without benefit of a stool. Only she managed it better. She shut the door and the carriage continued on its jerky ride. We sat there, sizing each other up in silence as we moved down the cobblestone streets. Light from outside lamps came and went, creating a flickering show of shadows inside. When that intermittent illumination came, I could see that her dress was even plainer than mine, threadbare in some places. At last she spoke, her voice tinged slightly with a working-class accent. "How'd you get your hair like that? All those curls lying just so?" It wasn't a question I'd expected. It also seemed blunt until I realized she thought we were of equal social rank. "It's naturally wavy," I said. She nodded impatiently. Yes, I can tell, but the way those curls are all arranged so perfectly. I've tried that myself, like the high-born ladies do. I think I'd need half a dozen hands to do it. I nearly said I had half a dozen hands helping me, and then bit off the words. I'd thought I was so clever changing into Ada's dress, but had gone off on this adventure with the same elaborately styled hair I'd had from this morning, which my maids had helped curl and pin in the latest fashion, cascading all around my shoulders. I gave my companion a tight smile back. Someone helped me, I said. I thought about Ada's backstory and tried to make it my own. Since it's a special occasion, I worked as a lady's maid, you see, so I have friends who are really good at this kind of thing. A lady's maid? Well, that's bloody lucky. I wouldn't want to leave that post. Explains why you talk so well. You'll have a leg up on the rest of us. She sounded impressed, and also a little envious. It's not a competition, I said quickly. There was another fleeting flash of light from outside, showing me a wry expression on her face. The hell it isn't. How we do and how well we learn affects who they offer us to as wives. I'm going to be a banker's wife, or a statesman's, not some farmer's. She paused to reconsider. Unless he's some dirty rich plantation owner where I can order around the servants and the household. But an ordinary farm wife, sweeping floors and making cheese? No thanks. Not that any old farmer could afford one of us. My mother heard from one of her friends that the glittering court got a marriage price of $400 gold for one of their girls. Can you even imagine that sort of money? Vaguely, I recalled Cedric talking about suitors making offers. The contract had further elaborated how the glittering court's agents made a commission off each girl's marriage price. Cedric might have spoken in lofty tones about his new nobility providing a service to the new world, but it was obvious this was a huge money-making venture for the Thorn family. The other girl was regarding me strangely, waiting for a response. I'm sorry, you'll have to forgive me if I sound scattered. This was all kind of last minute, I explained. The family I worked for was dismissing most of their staff, and so when Master Cedric was looking for girls, someone referred me to him. Oh, you're one of his, huh? I heard about that too, my companion said. He hasn't ever recruited before, you see. His father's one of the best procurers, and Master Cedric made a big deal about how he could be just as good, so his father let him pick a couple of girls. Caused a big family stir. You sure do know a lot, I said. She'd apparently received a more extensive pitch than Ada and me. I was delivering laundry to their house, she explained. My mother washes clothes, and I helped her, but no more. She held up her hands and studied them, but I couldn't get a good look. I'm not meant to be a laundress. I'm never washing anyone's damned clothes again. Her ambition radiated off her. I wasn't sure if that sort of initiative would be useful to me or not, but when in doubt, I'd found friendliness was usually the best course of action. I'm Adelaide, I told her warmly. It's so nice to meet you, miss. She hesitated, as though deciding if I was worth the next piece of information. Right. Tamsin Wright. The carriage began to slow, bringing us to our next stop. Both of us dropped the thread of our conversation as we waited to see who would enter next. When the door opened and revealed a girl standing outside, Tamsin's breath caught. At first, I thought the poor lighting was distorting the newcomer's appearance. Then I realized the tawny hue of her skin was natural. It was almost like caramel. I recalled the driver saying we were going near the Serminican quarter. It was one of the poorest districts in the capital, and I could just make out a few dirty, run-down buildings in the distance. I knew by reputation that it was overcrowded with refugees from Serminica, which had been locked in civil war for the last few years. Once it had been a great nation, and its monarchy had even intermarried with ours. Rebels had recently overthrown the royal family, and now the country was generally avoided as a chaotic war zone. This girl waiting by the coach's door with her lovely skin and luxurious black hair bore all the signs of being one of those refugees. She was also stunningly, breathtakingly beautiful. The driver had hopped down to admit her, giving her a wary look as she stepped forward. She carried herself with dignity, and after glancing between Tamsin and me, settled in on my side of the carriage. Her dress was even more worn than Tamsin's, but a shawl around her shoulders, stitched with intricate embroidery, was exceptional. Recalling his slurs, I wondered if the driver had come down to ensure she didn't rob us blind. When he continued waiting by the open door, I realized more was happening. Soon, 2 male voices carried to my ears, one of which I recognized. "Pretty enough, I suppose, but you have no idea how hard it's going to be to sell a Serminican." "That's not going to matter, not over there." "You don't know 'over there' like I do," came the biting reply. "You just threw away your commission." "That's not—" The words were abruptly cut off when the 2 speakers reached the carriage's doorway. One of them, an older man in his 40s, had only the faintest touch of silver in his brown hair. There was a dashing look about him, and he bore enough resemblance to Cedric Thorn to make me realize this must be his father, Jasper. The other man joining us was, of course, Cedric Thorn himself. My mouth went dry as our gazes locked. Even while being chastised by his father, Cedric had swaggered up to the carriage with that same self-assured ease I'd seen previously. Now he came to an abrupt halt, so suddenly that he nearly tripped over his own feet. He stared at me like I was an apparition. His mouth opened to speak and then shut abruptly as though, perhaps, he didn't trust himself. Jasper beamed when he saw Tamsin, oblivious to the silent drama occurring between Cedric and me. "So lovely to see you again, my dear. I trust your pickup was fine?" Tamsin's earlier calculation and wariness vanished as she returned his smile. "Oh, everything's been lovely, Mr. Thorn. The carriage is beautiful, and I've already made a new friend." His eyes fell on me, and I had to drag myself away from Cedric's pinning gaze. I noticed that Jasper, at least, regarded me with approval. "And you must be our other lovely companion, Ada, right?" Jasper extended his hand to me, and after several awkward moments, I realized he expected me to shake it. I did, hoping my unfamiliarity with the gesture didn't show. "You, I have no doubt, will have men beating down our door in Adoria." I wet my lips, having difficulty finding my voice. Thank you, sir, and you can call me Adelaide." Somehow that comment seemed to snap Cedric out of his daze. "Oh, is that what you're calling yourself now?" "It's an improvement," I said pointedly, "don't you think?" When Cedric didn't answer, Jasper nudged him. "Stop delaying. We need to get going." Cedric studied me a beat more, and I felt as though we both stood on a precipice. He was the one who determined which way we tipped. "Yes," he said at last. "Let's go." Jasper entered ahead of him, sitting beside Tamsin and taking up most of the seat on that side. Obligingly, the Serminican girl scooted over on our side, creating extra space. Recognizing the cue, I moved as well. After a slight hesitation, Cedric sat down beside me. It still made for close quarters, and our arms and legs touched. My grandmother would have been scandalized. He barely moved, and I could feel that his body was as rigid as my own, both of us tense as we came to terms with this new situation. Most of the subsequent conversation was carried by Jasper and Tamsin. I learned that the Serminican girl was called Mira, but she said as little as Cedric and I did. I commented once on the beauty of her shawl, and she drew it closer. "It was my mother's," she said softly, her words laced with a Serminican accent. There was a sadness in her voice I understood, one that stirred up an ache in my chest that had never entirely gone away. Without knowing anything else about her, I instantly felt a connection and asked her no more. When the carriage came to a full stop after about 20 minutes, Jasper looked up with satisfaction. "Finally, the gates. Once we're outside the city, we can get some real speed." We could hear agitated voices on the other side of the carriage door, and as the delay increased, Jasper's expression grew annoyed. "What's taking so long?" He opened the door and leaned out, calling to the driver. The driver hurried to the door, 2 gate guards behind him. "Sorry, Mr. Thorn. They're checking everyone leaving. Looking for some girl." "Not some girl," corrected one of the guards harshly. "A young noblewoman, 17 years old, a countess." I stopped breathing. "Who are these girls?" demanded the other guard, peering inside. Jasper relaxed. "Certainly not countesses. We're with the glittering court. These are common girls, bound for Adoria." The guard was suspicious, studying each of us in turn. I wished again I'd thought to change my hair. "What's this girl look like?" asked Jasper conversationally. Brown hair and blue eyes, said one of the guards, his gaze lingering fractionally longer on me. Same age as this lot. Ran away earlier this evening. There's a reward. I almost felt indignant, since I liked to think my hair was more of a golden brown. But it was a common enough description that it would apply to half the girls in the city. The vaguer, the better. Well, we've got a Serminican, a laundress, and a housemaid, said Jasper. If the reward's big enough and you want to pass one of them off as a countess, be my guest, but I assure you, we've seen where they come from. Hardly posh conditions. Although, Cedric, weren't you in some noble's house today? Isn't that where you got Adelaide? Did you hear anything? The first guard's gaze locked onto Cedric. Sir, where were you? Cedric had been staring straight ahead this whole time, perhaps hoping a lack of eye contact would render him invisible. Sir? Prompted the guard. The world seemed to move in slow motion, and all I could hear for several moments was the hammering of my own heart. I was reminded of that precipice again, only now I was losing my footing. All it would take was one word from Cedric, one word, to get me hauled back to my grandmother and Lionel. I didn't doubt Cedric was clever enough to spin the situation, to make himself sound innocent. And for all I knew, Cedric might think collecting a reward now was easier than earning a commission in Adoria. Cedric took a deep breath, and, as if putting on a mask, he became the swaggering young man from before. I saw Lord John Branson, he said. He nodded toward me. She was mending some fine lady's clothes at his house when I retrieved her, though. Does that count? This is hardly a joking matter, snapped the guard. But I could tell he was already losing interest in us, ready to move on. There were probably a lot of travelers trying to leave before curfew, and they didn't want to be delayed by one unlikely carriage. A runaway noblewoman would be skulking out, not sitting with reputable businessmen. You can go, said the guard. Thank you for your time. Cedric, still putting on a good face, smiled back. Not a problem. I hope you find her. The door closed, and the carriage started forward. Finally moving at a steady pace now we'd cleared the stops and starts of the city. I exhaled, all the tension melting out of me as I sank into the seat. I dared a brief glance at Cedric, but couldn't read his expression or intentions. All I could hope was that maybe, finally, I'd be free. Alright, thanks for joining us for Teen Story Share. Next time we'll read Chapter 4. Have a good weekend. Bye!